Yes, we're going to be looking at this sort of bejeweled, bedazzled kind of image today. So let me just, sorry, I'm just, something's popped up on my screen that's blocking the camera, which is annoying. So let's get rid of that. Right, so we're going to start off with whatever sort of shapes that you're going to draw in the middle. We're going to draw a shape in the middle and we're going to build some pattern around it and sort of get a structure in, and then we'll go in and we'll have a look at in detail at how to get this sort of cabochon jewel kind of effect. So you can start in pencil if you feel more, if you feel more confident working in pencil, and then sort of go over in pen afterwards. But I'm going to start off first of all in pen, just drawing the kind of outline of these pieces. So the shape that we want for this stone is kind of like a big teardrop shape. Now, it doesn't matter how accurate or inaccurate this shape is, because whatever shape it is, you can work with it, because it's just going to be a baroque sort of stone shape. So I'm going to start off with that's sort of like, you know, a freehand drawn teardrop. It's as good as I'm going to get it right now. It doesn't matter. In later ones, we might try doing some perfectly round ones, and for that, I'd probably recommend getting something to draw around. You know, don't give yourself any more grief than you need to. And then we're going to imagine this is in a setting, so we can add, we're going to just start with quite a simple kind of border around it. I'm going to slightly, it's not going to be totally symmetrical, so it's going to swing out one way, swing in again, and then kind of swing out, and we're going to add some textures and some interest around that, but that's going to be where we start with that. And then I think we'll do some sort of like a cluster of shapes going around here, so we can do some snail shapes, so just some nice snail swirls coming round, and you can sort of link them to, not link them, but let them touch each other as they go round. And if you get like they go, oh no, I haven't got enough, I haven't gone all the way around that one, just bring it round again and bring it down into a bigger swirl like that, because it's, you know, we're making it up as we go along. We're being inspired by the work that we looked at earlier, but we're sort of also, you know, we're riffing on a theme, I think, you know, in jazz terms. So I'm going to try and make them get a little bit smaller as we go round. I've totally failed to make that smaller. Let's try and make that one smaller. That's a little bit smaller. There we go. So that's finally going smaller. So I've got that round just disappearing off into that little shape round there. Then it'd be nice to get, I want to get some, there was some sort of like smaller jewels which we can put in if we have time. I'm going to do some rounds kind of coming round here. Again, they don't have to be perfect. They're not going to be perfect. If you are the sort of person that strives for perfection, then, as I said, I'd recommend getting one of those drawing templates. They're sort of like plastic sheets with the shapes cut out of them. They're usually, you can get them in stationery shops and the works and places like that, and they're dead cheap, but they are quite useful if you want to get really accurate shapes. But for this one, we can just stick to those sort of soft, round kind of forms. That's fine. That's going to eventually become like sort of jewels around there. And then I'm going to do, I want to get some slightly, we want to have a slightly different bit of texture around here, so it's not all just sort of smooth. So I'm going to do some sort of straight lines. So initially what I'm going to do is like sun rays. And don't worry, in fact, you actually want them not to be the same length. We want to sort of break them up into different lengths. And we're going to join them up to make actual sort of little rays, you know, little sort of sticks coming out. But start off by just putting in the sun rays coming round like this, and some of them can stretch out further, some of them can be shorter, and you can sort of, sometimes you get like a rhythm kind of going with them. You might do sort of big, medium, large, and then medium, small, and up again, so you're sort of getting, or you might just go for completely random. But I think it's nice to have some different forms and textures, so it's not all one note. We want to kind of break it up a bit, and as they come down towards the snail shells, we can make them go smaller, so they kind of like merge in like that. So it's quite good at the moment. It does look very much like a sort of drawing of a microbe under a microscope, but you know, it will look beautiful when we've finished. So we're going to make these look like little sort of prongs, I suppose. So just going to bring a line across the top like that, and that's going to join and just turn them from being lines into little pieces, I suppose. And if you need to, you can always come up and join another one in, or you can change them as you sort of feel. But we're thinking of it as like creating sort of prongs. So we're just going to put like a little line across the top so they're starting to have a different kind of feel. And you can see here with some of them, they sort of I can overlap them slightly. I'm just going to turn my light down because sometimes it wipes out the screen a bit. Is that better? Maybe a little bit better. Is that better? But it's off. Oh, it's hard to tell. It's the trouble is it always looks lovely and sharp when I'm looking at it here, and then the camera doesn't quite pick up all the subtlety that my eyes do, funnily enough. But I'm just going to work our way around, just turning those, and some of them are overlapping a little bit, and that's fine. Just gives it again a little bit of depth. So you can see how eventually we can use our shading to kind of make those overlaps more obvious. And it's very simple, it's just little straight lines, but it actually looks quite effective, I think, as a sort of design motif. Quite popular in Art Deco jewellery, this kind of thing. It's particularly done in baguette diamonds, which would be lovely, but they were very keen on their square geometric shapes. And in my part of my work with Kent, I also teach silversmithing and jewellery making down in Margate, and it's great fun to try and draw the stones. I've never been a great stone setter, I'll be honest, but I do like drawing them. Right, so that's sort of given us that nice kind of like pattern, sort of going around with a sort of squarer pattern. And then we're going to use some of those teardrop shapes to get this nice sort of swirling kind of quality again, a little bit like we used last week in the with the sort of sea slugs, it's the sea garden. And so I'm going to do a spiral kind of coming in here, or sort of like a teardrop shape, but as if its tail again is sort of tucked away underneath. So we get that sort of round fat shape like that. And then I can keep spiraling them and building them around again. So we're disappearing. So the tails are like tucked underneath this, and they're kind of overlapping out in segments, and they're going to come round. And however you want to shape them, they'll work out fine. We just want that nice sort of whooshing kind of feel, and as we come around the end they're going to get thinner and smaller, so again they sort of, you get that feeling of them tucking away and disappearing under, so you've got that nice sort of overlap kind of feel. So they're kind of building around there, and we're going to do one on this side as well, and this one we're going to see the bottom of the teardrop, the first one anyway. So we draw the teardrop in like that, so we've got that one there, and then we can sort of like imagine it's like a fan, so bring the teardrop from the same point, but again in overlapping petals, coming round like that, and they can go a little bit smaller. And then that last one is just, we're just going to see that tiny top bit of that last one, because we're just going to imagine we'd see that last bit. This pen is slightly running out, which, as I said before, means that don't throw it away. It means it goes and sits in the pen graveyard, because I feel too guilty to throw them away. I feel they have to go into pen retirement for a bit first, for their long service. And so that's that side there. And then we're going to do another sort of side, and there's going to be a little gap that we leave here, but we're going to deal with that in a minute. So we're going to do a long teardrop. It's going to start coming round from there. And again, lift the pen up. Imagine you're drawing that teardrop round. Put it down again. And then bring that teardrop into this side there. So we're starting another fan, kind of moving back this way. And here we go round. And again. So we're getting some lovely sort of swooshing shapes. And once you hit the top of the stone, again, you just want to tuck those in and away like that. And then where you've got this little gap that's appearing in between, this is going to be where we can put some of our little pearls. So that's just initially just outlines of little circles. And just follow the width that that shape gives you. So as it gets bigger, just put slightly bigger ones in, like peas in a pod. And then as it comes down and they go smaller, then your circles go smaller, and then they just fit nicely into that shape, and it's got that sort of rhythm that the shape has given you. So we're starting to build up quite a nice sort of piece. This would be one amazing brooch if we were going to make this all out of silver. So I'm going to put another one of these sort of soft drop spirals sort of on the top here. I'm just trying to draw it without masking the camera. I'm going to have to move a bit and come around this way, so I hope it's not going to mask too badly. But again, with this one, we're going to start with small drops and kind of move bigger. So start off with a a small line and bring it around the curl, but then I'm going to stop it. So it starts off at a sort of like an open-ended kind of C shape because I'm working back this way. And then I do another one and it's going to link up with that point and then come a little bit further and then stop like that. So that then immediately your brain starts to fill this in as being a teardrop shape, even though it's, you know, it's, you can't actually see that. And then I'm going to come in again from under here and bring it a bit larger. So it's sort of like doing almost like a sort of candy cane shape or upside down J. So you're just getting that line in, and then you take the next one and bring that past a little bit bigger. So it's getting larger. And then the final one here, we're going to see sort of all of it curling in round like that. So that becomes that shape there. And then on the other side, we're going to bring, we can sort of tuck one coming in around here. So you can then bring that in like that. So that's kind of moving around there, and tuck another one in coming that way. And this last one's going to disappear behind that first kind of set that we've drawn. And you might just see a little bit of tail kind of appearing down there. So we're getting some nice overlaps and some layering happening, and that's going to be fun later to work on that with the tone and the shading to make that look more sort of three-dimensional. Then we've got, these are going to be little stones kind of around here, so I want to put something that's going to come around there. So let's do a curl fitting round like a long teardrop shape. So it's got a nice sort of smooth round kind of bolster kind of coming round it almost. And then same with this one, so we can do the teardrop coming around there, and there's this little space there. If you don't leave a space there, it's fine, you can just do one that's sort of overlapping, but we can just bring that round, and then hopefully that will give a shape we can get so it looks nice and sort of fat there. And then we're going to do one last one kind of curling up and round here like a sort of sausage or a donut. Sort of, it doesn't sound very artistic, but you know, it will be when we've finished. And then we've also got these sort of long sections we want to put in here. So I'm going to do one great big long line like this, and then I'm going to do some kind of working of using this line as a sort of guide really. So I'm going to bring them out from here and then blend them into that line there. So we're getting that nice sort of definition, and bring these ones down and coming out from here. And if we keep the curve on them and let them tuck away into that shape there, then it'll give us it'll start to give us that sense of form as if this is sort of curving out a bit like that, and they're sort of blending in hopefully on there. And I'll make that a little bit wider, I think. Bring that down, and then as we get into this end, we're going to see this is the last sort of one coming out of here, but we're still going to keep using that line to kind of follow down and then they sort of get a curve in here and then draw it down onto there. I'm just going to have to change pens because this one, bless him, he's really stuttering, so I'll give him a rest and see if he can be revived by sitting on the desk for a bit. Sometimes that works. So we've got that sort of like almost like a heart shape. So let's get another sort of, I think we've got another kind of swoosh coming in under here in the same kind of way. So I'm going to bring a line from here and then under, and I'm going to let it come through and then poke out the side like that. So you've got like a little bit of overlap just happening down there. I'm just using a slightly bigger pen because it was the one that was there, so the line's going to look slightly heavier, but you don't need to change pens unless you want to. And then again, bring those lines. So we've got these nice long sort of, almost start to look a little bit like a feather somehow, like sort of feathers in a wing or that sort of feel as they come down, and keep them going in the way of that line, so we're getting that nice movement kind of moving round. Alright, here we go, and another one just coming through here. And then of this last section, just bring them, instead of going all the way from up here, just bring them from a little bit further down. Remember your overlap and your underlap, so just let them come through onto that. And so remember, so draw up to your line, raise the pen, mimic, pretend you're drawing, put it down again, and then that hopefully should bring that so that it does really look like it's going underneath. And we'll do a wing sort of section here as well. So again, nice curved line coming down and bringing these points down. So if you're drawing this, try and look at the point where you're headed. So look at this point down here, and then you'll find your line will kind of naturally go into that kind of curve. And just looking at the point where you're heading to, and you'll find that the curve just sort of happens without you having to think too hard about it. So again, just looking down at that point where you're bringing your pen to, and it should all match in beautifully. And even if it doesn't, we'll make it work. And then the last one, just to come into that point like that. And I'm going to do a small one kind of poking out behind. So, and then so I've done a long line there, and then I'm going to bring a short line coming out from under here. So that gives me a nice sort of curve there. And we can break that up. Maybe we'll make these sort of variations a bit thinner. So it just gives it a bit different sort of texture. So just some longer thin lines kind of coming through. Again, all just coming down into that point. And you always get that lovely effect of when you bring things to the same point, because all the black lines are converging down onto that point, it just makes it look a bit darker and gives it a bit of weight, which is nice. Right, so I'm not going to do a lot more outline because there's plenty to be getting on with here. I think I just want to put a little something up here just to sort of balance the whole composition. So I think we'll do, and we might put some little rounds in because there's always room to get some little extra pearls in somewhere. So we'll just do another sort of smallish wing shape up here. So I'm going to do a kind of curl going up into that corner like that, and then I'm going to take this time, I'm going to come down from the point and into the main body of the piece. So then, and then each time I do one, I'm going to start slightly lower down. So I get a sort of staggering kind of effect and come down into there, and then eventually I can tuck the last few little ones coming down to there like that. So it's just sort of giving that curl coming up. And then I think just to give a final sort of thing, I'm going to put some, as if this is sort of curled round, some pearls or maybe some sort of bubble shapes. So I'm going to just put like a cluster of, and again, because they're inside, we'll just see like a little bit disappearing behind the edge there, and maybe on that one as well. So they're sort of rounds. They're not perfect rounds, but you know, they're roundish. And then we're going to stack them so that you can just see them sort of one behind the other, like little baubles sitting in, as if they're all clustered inside a sort of curl there. And maybe like a little one poking out the top there. You can always go back and add more in, but I think that will give us a kind of feel for where we're going now. So before we get into doing the gemstone detailing, we're going to put a little bit more detail in some of these shapes to help give them some form. So for this area around here, I want to use some lines in here to make this look like it's sort of raised up and it's got some curve to it, so it's not just a flat disc that our stone is sitting in. So we're going to do some curved lines going around again to make some stripe forms, a bit like we did with the stripy sea slugs in the last one. But just do some curved lines, but so that they're arching up. So you can see, just putting the upwards arch like that, then it starts to give that a bit more shape. So it's not just a flat thing. So I'm going to come round, and so I'm doing them sort of relatively close together, a bit like the sort of stripy stockings kind of feel. But just bringing those round, and eventually we're going to do them some black alternate ones, and then some white with some shading in between like we did before, but that's going to help give that form. And as you come round, just let your lines follow the width that you've got. So as they come round to where it's thinner, and they might want to get a bit closer together. And then as they come around to the bottom, the very bottom one, just make it slightly straighter, and then slowly start to let them curve the other way. So these ones are all curving sort of up that way, sort of up left, and then these ones are going to start curving up the other way. And that should hopefully kind of transition that shape round this shape, around the whole sort of surface. And as we come up on here, we're going to get to a point here, and you'll start to think, oh yeah, no, I need the same thing again. So again, it gets slightly straighter and less of a curve, and then by the time we get up to the top, it's flattening out a bit, and then it starts to kind of curve the other way, so it's almost curving downwards, and then you'll start to find the shape kind of moves round the top, and now they're curving back towards the left, and so that when they come down, they're going to match up with where you started. Again, just take it slowly and just sort of keep thinking about how it wants to move, and then hopefully we'll get that feeling of a bit of 3D kind of quality with the lines coming round on that sort of thing there. And then I think we'll add a few bit of detail maybe in some of these sort of shapes around here. Let's sort of think again about similar kind of, let's break this up a bit into some, like a little bit like we did here, but let's take them round so we're getting those lines kind of coming, but they're much closer together. So the lines are kind of radiating out from that corner tucked in, and then they're spiralling round that stone like that. So each time they come round, and it makes a sort of, it always makes me think of, you know, in the old classic James Bond films, they had that sort of sight that you look down with, that sort of spiral. It just makes me think of that for some reason. So again, on the next one, just come into that point there, and just let them spiral round. So as they come round, they open up a little bit, and it just creates that nice spiral form, just sort of nesting around that stone there. We've got two more to do along here, trying not to cover it with my hand. I don't think I can get, I'll see if I can come around from this way. It's very difficult. I think you can just about see it there. I'm to keep thinking about, I mean, it's not that difficult, but I mean, you know, I'm just trying to make sure that you can see what I'm doing, which means I'm drawing at a slightly weird angle compared to how I might draw it. There we go. So we're getting, and again, as you get more lines on that, it just starts to give them a bit more darkness and a bit more solidity. So this one's slightly different because I've got a wider end here, but I expect something will happen. Let's just try taking that one round and just starting the ends moving up. That sort of works. And then we can disappear that off into there, and maybe that's just going to come there to see that bit there. So that sort of does a different kind of thing, but it's sort of different but the same, you know, that sort of idea. Right, so do we need any more? I think where we've got some, I want to have a quick look and just think about where I want to put the really dark areas of shadow in to make things sort of pop out. So I think I've got a slightly thicker pen here. This is not a brush pen, but it's a pen with a slightly chunkier nib. You might feel happier just going for a thin one and just sort of, you can just mark out where you want it to be darker, like just do a heavier outline, and then you can go back and colour it in. But I just want to come around these sort of like sun ray shapes that we're doing. I definitely want to make those stand out. So where I've got some funny little gaps that have appeared. So I'm going to colour those in dark. So see, what you can do is just do an outline like that to remind yourself where you want to colour it in dark later. And if you're feeling that you can keep up, you know, you can go in and just colour all of that dark to start making that pop out a bit. So it's really just working around those square shapes, because where they meet the curves, they're not exactly, they're two different things coming together, so they might not have got a perfect sort of join, but that's just starting them to make them sit up. There's a little one in there I want to get, and I'm quite liking that, and I think I'd quite like to make these quite strong, and so I'm going to come in with my thicker pen and just thicken up some of the lines that I've got on these little uprights. It's almost like putting a little row of shadow. I'm just going to do the verticals so that the lines, and it'll look a little bit like a shadow, and then if they overlap, I'm going to follow around the overlap as well. So some of them are kind of look like little L shapes because they're coming round and overlapping. If you haven't got an overlap, don't worry, just don't worry about it. But I'm just going to do those verticals a bit heavier so they've got a bit more weight, as if they're casting a little black shadow on the line below. Here we go, just working our way around again and into that dark line. It's just going to make them pop out and give them a bit more strength and a bit more heft in the whole picture, because I think because they are, everything else is really curvy and they're standing out, I want to make them stand out even more so that they're definitely standing out against all these curves for being something a bit different. I think it just adds a bit of drama to have that contrast in shapes going on. I'm going to come around this side. Just going to move. I've got my camera is on a sort of stick in front of me, so I have to kind of slightly work around it because they haven't worked out yet how to do cameras that allow you to sort of do drawing very easily. I want one that sort of reverses the picture so I can have it pointing down from above and then it wouldn't get in the way of my hand. But I expect they have invented it, but I just can't find one yet that does that. So I'm trying to do it without, hopefully not blocking too much with my hand. Here we go. And there we are. So that's given them a bit more drama. We might come back and we'll come back and do more on them, I expect. Okay, so I think what will be quite good now is to get the stone done, because that's the most sort of challenging bit of shading, I suppose. And I want to spend the most amount of time on, and hopefully the rest of the shading, if I do a little bit, we should be able to see, to follow it. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit onto the centre, this sort of big white shape in the middle. Let me just get that straight. I have to push, there we go. So we can see that it's nice and big. So we need to leave some areas of white on the paper so that they're going to form the white highlights, because I probably said this before, that when you're drawing on white paper, the whitest you can be is the paper itself. So everything else around that paper has to go a bit darker so that you can get the contrast and you can make that highlight look really strong. And to make something look brighter, you want to eventually get darker and darker around it so that the contrast is really ramped up. I'm going to start with my mid-tone blue and I'm just giving it a sharpen. If you feel more sort of confident about it, you don't have to draw these sort of highlights in, but to work out how to do this, I think it's quite useful to see. So I'm going to draw very faintly in the mid blue pencil the shape of my highlight. So I hope that will come across. So I'm going to do a circle first of all. I hope you're just seeing that, and it's very sort of faint in blue. We're going to go around it heavier, but we're going to build up to that gradually. And then I'm going to do sort of like a long sort of sausagey shape, maybe like a long teardrop shape, so it's curving round and disappearing off like that, and then maybe a smaller circle kind of in here. Usually highlights are actually made by the object obviously it's a reflective object, and it's usually reflecting a sort of lighting above, so often they look, if you actually look at them, they're like two distorted strip lights, or so that's quite a good thing to sort of think about. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I've got those marked out, so I want to try and avoid getting any colour into those white sections. They've got to stay as bright as we can get them. I'm then going to start off with my dark pencil, and the first bit I'm going to do is shade round the outside edge of my stone. So I'm using my darkest blue, and I don't have to worry too much because I'm going to blend into this. So I'm doing a fairly narrow, almost like a shaded outline in blue, in the darkest blue, and that will also help to kind of show where my stone is. It will start to make it look sort of obvious. It's always good if you can, should you have a collection of fantastic jewels, is to, once you've had a go at drawing them, is to go and have a look at some and try and just see. They always feel quite daunting to draw, but really if you can just sort of break them down into areas of light and shade and see your highlights as almost like whiteness, you can start to get a sense of how to capture them. So that's just sort of like establishing our kind of blue outline around there. Now with the stone you get the very white reflective highlights, but then you also get a kind of iridescent light that's coming from inside. So there's going to be an area roughly around here that we're going to keep very pale. So I'm going to keep my shading away from that area to begin with, But I'm now going to bring my shading round those highlights that I've drawn in. I'm doing a fairly light press, not too hard. I'm using the dark pencil, but I'm being quite light with it. I'm not at the moment going to like make it really heavy. I will do later, because what I want is to blend in round those areas that I've drawn in, but I want the outline to disappear into the blue, so that I'm not seeing a contrasting outline, because that won't look quite right. It'll look a bit odd. It's like if you drew them in black pen first and they had a big black line around them, they wouldn't look like a highlight. They'd look a bit sort of strange. We can see that's just the area that I've identified. Do them quite light to begin with, because we're going to go back and do them darker, but we're going to just get them so we can see them quite clearly. So I'm just going to bring my shading down. So this half of the stone is going to have more colour in it anyway. It's going to be darker because the highlights tend to sit brightly against the very darkest part of the stone. So let's bring, so I'm just following the shape. If you use sort of nice round curved shapes to be highlights, it tends to give your stone a kind of round quality. If you had a faceted stone, then you'd see your highlights as sort of squares and rectangular shapes rather than round shapes. And then I'm going to bring this shading round the sides, but I'm going to get quite close to the edge quite quickly, almost like I'm drawing shading in a second drop shape. So I want to keep this area quite white to begin with. Be quite sort of nervous about going in there to begin with, because we can always make it a bit darker later, but we can't. It's quite hard to line it up again. So again, I'm just keeping that shape, just bring it around, still using the dark pencil, but a lighter touch with it. So hopefully you should see a slight difference between the two. So I'm just keeping that oval shape. It hasn't got to be a perfect oval it hasn't got to be exactly the same shape as your stone, but just sort of roughly that kind of oval area in there. Okay, so hopefully we're seeing where the highlights are, and we're seeing this kind of oval. We're going to go back and we get darker and darker around these highlights, but I want to swap to my middle tone blue. So this is a lighter blue, so it's not going to get as dark. But then I'm not just going to colour it in here. I'm going to go over what I've already done, but but this time I'm using the mid-tone blue. So it shouldn't make it a lot darker, but it's just going to add a different quality to it, because if you layer the colours like this, it's much easier to get a really subtle changeover between the two. So I'm just going to do a very slight, I'm going to encroach into this big white oval very slightly, but mostly I'm going to focus on going back over the first sort of layer of blue that I put down. So it's just about building it up slowly and carefully, and gradually we're going to get more and more, hopefully more and more closer to the kind of shiny effect we're after. And we want this colour to be really punchy and jewel-like, so that the rest of it is a lovely contrast to it. So once I've sort of put some of this mid-blue over all of the blue I've already done, then very lightly I'm going to come like a bit more at the top of this oval here and just into that white space. And we can always go darker later, so just start to gradiate and blend a little bit of that the paler blue into that. So I'm just sneaking a bit into that white space, but not too far, keeping it quite low. Quite low, do I mean low? Narrow, I suppose. It's very hard to think of the word, but yes, just encroaching a bit into that space. So hopefully my blend is quite nice and soft through there. Okay, so that's got a bit more softness coming in. I think I'm going to now go back to my darker colour and get some more darkness in around the edge, and round these highlights as well, to start making them pop up a bit more. So I'm going to concentrate on starting off at the sort of the top end of my stone here, and a bit more pressure now from that blue pencil. So you should see that coming out as a bit darker. And I'm trying to be quite crisp with the line around your highlight. If you need to, you might need to sharpen your pencil to get that in because I want to make that line quite hard, because it's the hard contrast makes that highlight look like a gleaming highlight more than a sort of soft glowing highlight. I've got a bit of texture coming through on the paper, such is life, but you know, if you had perfectly smooth paper it would be an even stronger kind of result. If you're doing watercolour pencils, you can use a brush to kind of blend around and then just very carefully take your wet brush around the edge of that shape just to really firm up that edge. It's a very similar process, but maybe there's an element of, perhaps the element of danger, like we're doing it surrounded by vipers or something, but you know, there's an element of danger where the paint can run a bit, but hopefully seeing with that sort of getting that blue a bit harder, those highlights are starting to pop out a bit more. So I'm just sticking round that edge. Eventually I want the strongest blue to be all the way around the highlights and keeping them nice and fat and round, and so we want to get all of this darker before it goes out into the central bit and blends in. So I'm going to come in around here and get all of this darker, so we go past the highlights with the dark blue pencil as well, and then eventually we're going to soften that line up again. But see, hopefully that's starting already. We're just seeing those highlights in stronger kind of form is making that look nice and shiny. Bring your dark pencil round and down the outline around that shape as well, because you always tend to get this sort of, it does almost look like an outline with the central colour being light. I want to get a bit more shadow in here, a bit more of the dark blue pencil on this side. If I'm going to move my pencil around here, I don't know if I can slightly focus this a little tiny bit more. Excuse it wobbling for a second while I try. Is that sharper? No, that's definitely softer, isn't it? I think that's better. I think that's slightly better. Right, so I just want to make sure that this edge of the highlight in here, that's quite nice and firm and sharp. And then bring it round into, so we should be seeing still this sort of like central oval. You might feel that the edge of it is a bit more defined than it was when you started. That's okay, because we're going to blend that in now. So nice and dark into that shape all the way round, like that. And then I want to take this blue a little bit further, but I'm trying to get a blend now. So softer pencil, but still the dark pencil, just working almost like round and round, as opposed to sort of any direction. Just if you do round and round, you tend to get a sort of softer, you don't get some directional lines, so it's sort of easy to blend that into that sort of section, just coming a little bit more into that central oval, and just making sure that all the highlights around those, all the area around those highlights is nice and dark. And then I'm going to blend that up a bit. So I'm going now, remember that mid-tone we put in? I'm kind of like going over the top of that now with the dark blue. I'm not pushing too hard, but I am definitely colouring it over. We're going to go back in with the mid-tone in a second. So that's, again, sort of blended that in a bit more. Still want to get that edge nice and sharp of that highlight. The sharper you can get them, the more they're going to look like highlights on a stone. So just make sure that back edge is really nice and dark, okay? And then I'm going to go just a little bit more of that mid-tone blue, and then we're going to use the green. So mid-tone blue, again over the top of my dark blue, but then just taking it a tiny bit further into the white zone, so that's helping us hopefully to get that lovely smooth blend between the colours. And it just takes time to sort of layer them up, but it's very effective, I think, when we get it going. So I'm just coming a bit more into that section, trying slightly more on the top half, as it were, so slightly more in this middle section, this bottom section here, leaving that definitely untouched. So just taking a bit more over sort of to about here, sort of about the halfway mark of the stone shape, sort of. So I'm just making that slightly heavier there. And then I'm going to get my green. I'm using the green because it's very close to blue, but it has that slightly extra, because it's green, it's got a bit more yellow tone in it, which gives it that bit of warmth. And this is when we're going to start hopefully getting this nice sort of iridescent quality happening inside there. So Again, starting off in the dark zone, so you might not see too much green to begin with, but it's a way of kind of building it up without, you know, finding your confidence with the pencil and where it's sort of going. And then I'm going to start blending it over this the middle section that I've drawn, and then just getting a little bit of it into the white section. And hopefully we're seeing that that's sort of warming up that colour, and we're nibbling into that white section, but with this sort of greenier, warmer tone. Still don't want to get rid of all the white, still just trying to leave a patch of it in the middle. But it's going to be a good introduction into the final kind of warmest bit of the stone. And I can just start to see some of that green shading coming through. It's not coming through as strongly on the camera as it is for me, but I'm hoping that you're seeing the effect where you are as well. Like that. And then once I've got that bit of green in, I'm going to then swap to yellow, because the yellow is going to be like my glowing highlight sort of internal colour. And that I'm going to start working on over the greeny blue section and really just sort of eating that into the white section. Again, you're probably going to have to press quite hard to get the yellow to come out. I'm overlapping the blue with it as well. And hopefully that's starting to sort of, again, help to kind of blend the colours and bring some warmth into that section. And you're going to almost go all the way over that last bit of white with the yellow, because it's a very pale colour. But I'm hoping that you're seeing that's bringing some light and warmth into that sort of central stone. If you leave a tiny bit of white in the middle, that's all for good. But really using that yellow to kind of blend over the top of your mid-tone and your green shading. And that sort of starts to hopefully bring that to life. Like that. And then remember I mentioned the white pencil. I find, although it's a very subtle thing, if you can get a white pencil and then bring that just colouring over all of it, it kind of acts almost like a smudge stick to really start to blend those colours and get that transition between them smooth. So I'm just kind of working all the way around over that, and that's basically there, just to kind of smooth all that over. I think I'd still like to get a little bit more of a dark tone into that section up around the back of it. I think that might be something, and it might have to go and grab a purple, but we'll leave that for now. We might come back to it in a bit and add a bit more purple. With the white acrylic paint pen, I'm just shaking it up a bit here. It's usually one of those ones you have to kind of pump it up and down to get it to work, but that gives you a controllable like sort of white highlight. So I might just maybe add in like a little line and a dot, like a whisk down line like that of sort of highlight, and that's easy to control with the acrylic than trying to leave that space. And you can sort of go round the edge of your highlight and again just sort of tidy that up a bit and make that very strong sort of highlight. Now often when I'm doing something like this, I would almost tend to do it the other way around, tend to do the stone bit last, but I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to follow how we were doing that so that you could see it sort of all the way through. So hopefully that's really starting to come to life and we've got that feeling of reflection. If I pull out a bit from there, you should see how that should look. We should get that lovely sort of glowy sense, that sense of light and reflection going on in there. So what I'm going to do now is, when you have something that's reflective and we're trying to create these kind of metal surfaces, you get a lot of like reflected colour on the surroundings. So we're going to make this section around here stripy, but I'm going to start off with just putting some blue in around this edge. Now I'm going over the lines as if they weren't there, and that's because I'm going to draw them blacker, so they will kind of like, they'll ignore them, it'll cover up over this completely. But I'm just putting a little bit of blue shading in around the stone, imagining that this is curving down, isn't it, towards the stone. So just that kind of edge where it curves down, I'm going to put some reflective colour. It doesn't have to go all the way around, it's just like a little swish of colour kind of going round. And then I might even add some of that blue, because the green is like our, the green's like our sort of highlight colour in there, and it's like, you tend to often get like a star inside a stone that kind of flashes and moves with the light. So that's the green. So I'm going to add a little bit of green into that, and we'll see how that will stay. Once I do every other stripe in black, it'll stay, and it'll start to add a bit of reflective colour. So imagine these are kind of white and they're somehow reflecting what's going on there. So I'm going to do the black stripes now. Remember how when we did the other ones, we left a little bit of white on the black stripe to look like a highlight. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing here. So if you imagine, if I'm going to start off with, it doesn't matter whichever stripe you start on. Of course, sometimes you find that you've got an uneven number and you get two stripes next to each other, but we'll cope with that if we do. So we start down here where they're smaller. So I'm going to start colouring it in quite close to the stone, and I'm going to leave a section of white and then colour it in like that. So that gives us like that sort of little bead of highlight there. And if you want to, you can slightly break it up with a few little lines, but it's not essential. And then, so do the next one. So just try and get the highlight at the top of the curve as you come down each time. There's quite a few of these, so I'm going to do like a few round one side. I will come back and do all of them, but I just want to kind of give the effect and then move on to some of the other bits, so we're not just looking at the same thing. As they get bigger, you can kind of build it up by doing stripes like side by side of pens like that, and then leaving that white section in the middle. So we're starting to see that sort of shine carry on. And you can see how that blue reflective colour is still on the white stripes fine. So let's bring that up there, and then same on this side here. I'm just doing little pen flicks up. You can do a solid line, you can leave a solid shadow, a solid highlight, sorry, whichever is going to work. So I'm going to carry this on up to here, but again, so lines up from the stone, like this, kind of coming up. And then from the edge to meet that, sort of reaching up towards that white highlight, but keeping as if it's sort of following on the kind of bump of that surround. And it's when you break it down and think about it, it's quite straightforward. But when you step back and look at it, you can see that kind of like, it really gives that lots of form, and it gives it that lovely curved kind of shiny feel. So eventually we'll do that all the way round like that, and that will give that a nice sort of metallic. And you could have used a different, you could use a whole range of colours. You could do, you know, a sort of blue and gold, very kind of Egyptian kind of motif, and use the same kind of technique just by leaving that little bit of white in the middle. And with that in mind, I'm going to do a little bit more on the white stripes that we've got there. We've got a little bit of reflected colour, so I'm going to put a little bit more. I'm going to use that blue as a shading, just a little bit on that side as well. Still imagining that I'm leaving that white line as my highlight on the top of that curve. So using the black as a kind of guideline with the same sort of, so you can just see I'm just getting that little bit of highlight and then the shading in there, and that's helping to kind of give that a nice kind of 3D feel. And the same just in that, and then we'll move on from here, but you can see how eventually you do that all the way around, and this should look like a sort of fat, like enamelled piece of jewellery with a stone sitting in the middle. I think I'd be quite tempted as well to slightly darken down the edge of the stone on the setting bit. So like maybe really just make that outline a little bit heavier, just so that it disappears down into that line. Just gives it a bit more depth again. You can be quite bold with your contrasts when it comes with reflective surfaces, because you imagine it would sort of be reflecting a bit of the kind of black line as well. So let's just bring that round. I mean, if you've got a 0.8 pen, that would be the kind of one to use for this if you haven't got a brush pen, or this very fine brush pen anyway. So it's just giving that again a bit more strength and a bit more depth around like that. So hopefully that's really helping that sort of pop out. So let me come onto these ones. With these, we've got these sort of the sort of spokey sections here. With these, I've got those black lines in, so I want to work towards that black line. So I'm using my blue pencil and just blending into that black line, but I'm going to leave a little bit of white around the edge. I'm going to be quite stark with it. I'm probably going to come back and blend that a bit more in, but I'm just following that black line that I've drawn in again, just to make these pop out a bit more. Here we go. And we're getting a bit of colour, and that's helping with the whole overlap kind of feel. I'm going to stick basically to these kind of bluey green colours on this whole thing. Of course, you could totally add in, you could go into tones of gold and brown, you could go into any colour you want to at this point. You could do all in greys and give it a real kind of monochrome, silvery kind of feel. You can just use a little bit of blue in the shading and something else blended with it. It's, you know, and once you've done it once, you can sort of like, you know, practice doing different colourways to see how you feel. You know, it's completely up to you. That is the joy of doodling. It's only ever a starting point. So you can see I'm just adding a bit of shadow on that, and they start to pop out really nicely. So again, I might want to, maybe if I'm going to use all these colours again, bring in some of the green tone later to kind of blend into that. Just and again, if you just go over the top of your darker shading with the mid shading, it really helps to work those two together so that you're not it helps to blend your shadows, make that transition really sort of smooth. And if you're not sure, keep it quite light to begin with, because you can always darken it up later and add a bit, go over it again and again and make it stronger. So keep it quite light until you're sure where you want to go with it. Because, you know, it's like you can always it's like your hair, you can cut it off but you can't make it grow, so go slowly. I'm just going to blend that last bit of green. Again, I'm going to continue this round all the way around here, but I just want to do little sections so we get a sense of all these sort of things, and then we'll come back if we've got more time. Bump into that now and add it. Right, so I'm going to go for, we're going to look at some of these nice, the sort of lovely fat petals kind of around there. I'm going to stick to my mid-tones. I'm not going to get them as dark as here, because I still want this to kind of stand out quite nicely. We'll look at these small ones as well before we finish, so that we can do like little tiny versions of this technique on a smaller scale, these little rounds here. Let's look at these sort of soft petals here. To begin with, where we've got these uprights or sort of sun ray shapes, they're definitely going to cast a shadow. So let's go in and get that in. When you're sort of doing this sort of thing, if you're not sure where to start, just think, well, where is there going to be a shadow? Because I'll start with that bit because I know there's going to be shadow there. So I can continue that down the line where that one overlaps. And to begin with, you can just do that overlapping line and then just leave that, and we can come back, and so you can always add more to it later. So I'll do the same thing under here. There's definitely going to be shadow underneath those two shapes there, and then we'll bring that round following that soft shape all the way around, and that gives you that nice overlapping feel. And same under here. There we are, just coming around those sort of shapes, softening that. I think I'm going to want to get that a bit darker under there, but I said I'm going to come back to it later and deepen it down when I'm sort of got this bit in. I'll just do this last one, this one here, so we're getting that sort of filler, just starting to be overlapping. We're starting to get that contrast. If you can with these sort of ones, see if you can sort of slightly follow the shape of those sun ray bits, and it'll sort of give you a slight edge to follow, kind of like, because the shadow would come from that shape above. And so let's bring this down and along here. So you can see that's given us a rough idea of where the shading would come in there. But now you can think, right, okay, so I'm going to make that a bit more dramatic. So I can take it a bit further out maybe onto the shape, keeping it quite light, keeping it a nice soft blend. And then I can come in and maybe darken around the edge of that shape, just a little way around. But that starts to help make that look more beany and sort of rounded. And I can, a little bit like we were doing with the pearls, you're sort of trying to keep this sort of area here pale whitish, so that you're not, it's starting to look like a soft highlight. It's not going to be as hard as the gemstone highlight. We want the texture to feel different. but we're just going to let it sort of blend through into that sort of soft space. So we've got a nice sort of round, soft feel to it. And same with this one, and you can just bring a little bit onto that edge round there and back up and and then now you can sort of see how I can take, and so now I'm thinking, oh, I definitely want to get a bit more oomph into the shading on some of these overlaps. So now I can go into my darker blue, and I'm quite confident that under there it wants to get a bit darker. I can see that. So I always say with these sort of things, don't try and think about the whole thing, just be happy with the next stage you're doing, you know, one little bit at a time. Because if you think, I don't know where to start, well, I know that I want to make this bit of shading darker, so I'm just going to add a little bit of extra shadow along that edge. So I know that then I can do that to all of these shapes, and then when I've done all those shapes, then it'll look different because you'll have done something to it. So then you can think, well, where will I take it from here? So like with this one, I think, well, I need to do this one along that edge in the same kind of way. So we're just bringing up that bit of extra definition, so it's starting to make that. And if you're sort of looking at that and you're thinking, oh, I think that line looks a bit liney, is that a word? It looks a bit too stark, it looks too much like a sort of outline and not like a shading, then I can come back, and I'm very light pressure on this pencil now, not strong at all, you know, but just very gently, little round and round movements again, just along that darker edge, and that allows me to blend those lines in. And then just, you know, if you want to control it, just don't press very hard, you know, just build it up slowly and slowly with a very light pressure, and you can see how straight away this is much softer, and sort of the colour change is much more gradual compared to this, where you can see that really hard sharp line. So that's just by using that pencil, still the dark pencil, but just not putting the pressure on. And I've got that base of the mid-tone, and I find that as you add layers of the pencil, it kind of slightly changes the surface of the paper, so you can get smoother and smoother effects when you're working on top of a pencil base. And then you can find you can get some control in to get the sort of nice and soft, and get that gradation. And as you come down this way, as they're disappearing down, sort of getting smaller, they're probably getting a little bit darker as well. That will help to give that transition as they curl round like that. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that dark pencil and just cover a bit more of that surface area. So as they go down, you can see they're just going to have a little bit of white showing, and they're going to be a little bit darker. And then when I get down to these ones are going to get really quite dark in comparison, because I want to get some shading into that. And I might even think about going over the top and putting some black pen into that maybe, but that would come a bit later on if I want to get that even darker. And then that little one that's got to get really dark, I've got to really scrub that in. So I can be pretty confident that getting that shape in with plenty of dark blue pen is going to be absolutely fine, so I can go to town on that bit. So hopefully you then got that nice sort of gradation between the two. And where I've got that white bit here, if I'll knock that back a bit, I can use some of the mid-tone pencil to start around in there. So all of these overlaps, we can start getting all those in the same kind of way. The same with these overlaps here. With these ones, I would probably do a little bit more shading at the top of each one, sort of just like that bit there where it's going underneath that round, and then probably keep my shading along those lines, so the middle of that section. And then as it comes down to the point here, it's just going a bit out of focus there, but I would then make it go a bit darker towards that point there. So as that's sort of curling away, so hopefully you can see that sort of giving again just that little bit of shade, sort of getting that form round. Right, so I'm going to, we've got these little sections here, and we wanted to make these look like stones as well, didn't we? So let's just move things over slightly so they're slightly more in focus. There we go. So really it's the same process that we did on the big one, but just smaller. Same thing again, but smaller. So I'm going to leave a single highlight ball on one of these. So almost like a little sort of kidney bean or baked bean shape at the top. So that's what I'm drawing in first. Remember, first of all, with the kind of mid-tone pencils, that's so that we can go over the top with a darker pencil and we can eventually disappear that outline altogether. Then I come round the edge with the dark pencil. So that's just going to be doing a round, like making that a thick blue outline, first of all. Like that, just so we can see that. And then we go round that kidney bean or baked bean shape with the dark blue. So that becomes more obvious. And then I'm leaving a sort of slightly off-centre white section. So at the moment it looks like a sort of figure eight, doesn't it? Or like you've got two highlights. But I'm going to get that all in blue. Then I'm going to swap to my paler blue and first of all go over the dark blue with it and then slightly encroach into that white space, so hopefully we're getting a blend. You've got a smaller space to work into, so it's quicker, but it's still important to think about your layers of colour. So that's softening that white shape there, making it into a sort of, so we should hopefully just about see like a pale blue outline on it. Then I'd probably try and get my highlight darker just by working my pencil around there again, and then a little bit more around the edge again, just going in and really scrubbing that pen. This is where we go through a lot of sharpening, because you're going to put pressure on that pencil and it's going to snap those delicately thin edges. Then it's green pencil time. So again, over that, colouring over the mid-tone blue first, just to warm that up a bit, and then a little bit into that, just leaving a tiny dot of white in the middle. But hopefully that sort of is starting to get that lovely glow kind of feel happening. And then the yellow pencil, and that's going to be our warm, again going over what you've done already, so blending into the blue and the green, and then just colouring into that last white. So that should hopefully give that nice kind of glowing sort of feel, so we're getting that nice iridescent quality. And then white pencil just to blend that surface together and help to blend those colours and give it that lovely slick kind of feel. So there we go. So that's got that. I think sometimes on that small scale it's even more effective. So I'm going to do it again on the one above, so we can go through it again. Eventually it becomes like, you know, you get the process down and you can start sort of, you know, it becomes sort of second nature really. So again, the first thing we do is using the mid-tone blue, identify where we want the highlight. When you've got a series of shapes that kind of all on the same piece and doing the same thing, try and get your highlight in roughly the same place on each of your stones. If you start wibbling them and doing in different areas, it looks less convincing, because they're all going to be under the same lighting conditions, so they're all going to be picking up on the same light. You were going around looking at shiny things. I mean, I spend a lot of my time staring at shiny things, but you start noticing how the highlights work on things and you get quite distracted. And the worst one is when you get distracted looking at someone's eyes, because eyes are obviously very reflective and shiny, and you start staring at someone looking at and they wonder why you're staring quite so intently at them, and then you say, no, I'm not really looking at you, I'm looking at the way the highlight works on your eye. Or maybe that's just me, but at least I've been there. So once I've got my highlight baked bean drawn in, I then do the outline again in the dark blue. So coming around to establish that. And obviously any colour range that you're using, the same principle would work. So you could use, if you're doing a red stone, for example, you could do a burgundy as your dark colour and then a scarlet as your medium colour. And then I would do like, you could either go into orange for your warming up colour with a yellow highlight, or you could go into the pinks if you wanted to go more down the kind of garnet route. So that's drawn that round the edge first. Then I'm going to draw in and shade round my highlight with the dark pencil so that that's established as a nice white highlight. Okay, so that's got them there. Then I go into my mid-tone, starting off by going over the dark blue and then just slightly encroaching into that white space. And just sort of blending that through. There we go. Then I'm going to go into green. So, and again, start the green off going over where you've already shaded. So it's a way of introducing that colour without it becoming like sort of the layers of a sucked gobstopper. You know, you want to sort of get those colours so you can hardly see where they change. And then over that mid-tone with the green. And you can see when you look between the two how this one doesn't have any yellow yet, and it doesn't have the life. This one's got a lot more life to it. So you can see that when you bring that last bit of yellow in, that's when it really starts to glow and it starts to get it looking beautiful and gleamy. Just that yellow over. I'm going to make my blue slightly darker on the top of this one. I think it just needs to go a bit deeper through there. There we go. And then I'm going to just use my white over the top just to give it that sort of overall blended surface. And that just helps kind of give it that sort of liquid surface all over. Okay, so building up from here, I think I want to take, in the way that we use some black here to sort of get the background in a bit darker, I'm going to come in and these sort of odd little triangles that I've got around here, I'm going to get those darker, I think, just so that they help to really bring those stones popping out. Because obviously the biggest contrast is in the colours, for the colours would be against the black background. So that's going to really help just to pop those and give them some real energy. And just take that shape right the way down there. Following those shape around. We're going to continue our black lines all the way around. Just little flecks of pen up and down. There's always one where you suddenly realise you've coloured in the wrong one and you've done two blacks next to each other, or two greens or whatever. If the worst comes, to just go with it, pretend you meant it, really. So I can just bring those around. I just want to see how they join up to those spirals on this side. So again, just little flicks up from the bottom, so you're leaving that white space in the middle. And that will start, give that sort of 3 different. We'll try and look at one of these spiral shapes as well while we're here, before we finish. So I just bring that up through into there. We can get, remember, so that's bringing that shape round into there. So with the spirals, we've got these sort of nice sort of snail spirals next to the blue shell, but we don't want to get them too lost into that. So I think I'll probably, what I could do with is a grey pencil, I think, or a lead pencil. I'm just going to add, so I've got a greyer tone into these snails. You could use a different colour, but it's just to, where that's blending down into that black, I'm going to use just that darker grey colour so that it's a nice contrast to that blue stone. Just follow that edge round again with your shading, just following where that spiral goes, and then you can just bring it out gently into the shape so that we're getting some curl, and then maybe on the other edge as well, so we're getting some form of that moving round. And again, I'm leaving, almost imagining there's like a sort of white highlight going down the middle of the snail spiral, and that will help to make that look like a sort of 3D shape. And a little bit of shading into there. And it's almost like doing like a spiral of shading into that spiral, kind of separate from the shape, the pen shape that you've drawn, and then going back, and we can make that line in there especially dark with some extra force. If you've got one of those lovely sets of pencils with sort of B and HB and 2B and 4B, this is when you can get, like, you know, you can work your way through your pencil set. I'm just using a HB pencil, which I managed to grab from my desk, but that just gives that a little bit of, I don't think you want to get, we don't want to have the colours sitting too close together, otherwise you'll kind of lose the impact of those stones. So again, with this one, I'm just colouring the tails of the drops of those sort of sections in a bit darker with my, or shading them in, sorry, with my pencil, just to bring, again, some more tones and more depth of shadow around those blue shapes. When you could do lovely ones of these in sort of shades of gold. So if you wanted to do like gold settings for all of these, then you'd be using like a dark brown for your dark shade and then blending that into a gold, yellow or sandy kind of colour, and that will give you a really good kind of feeling, a bit like gold. I think if you did that with a blue, it's going to give it a lovely kind of ancient Egyptian kind of pharaoh's mask kind of feel to it. But you can have so much fun with different colour schemes and different sort of stone ways. You know, if you went for you could do a lovely one with what am I thinking in my head? I can't get the words out. I'm thinking of, you could do all coppery tones for the metal. That was which I was thinking of, with sort of like a nice rosy pink kind of stones, and that it would be really gorgeous. Or maybe a nice sort of acidy, like peridot green with a kind of copper metal rather than just going for silver or golds. But hopefully, again, keeping those colours quite monochrome around that stone, that's really helping those gems to kind of glow. And so when you get to these sections here, I'm going to use just my grey pencil again, just in the same sort of like we were doing here, but just to put a little bit of shadow in under there, and then carry that on down my line to leaving that middle section quite white, and then bringing my line down towards that point there, so that down here I know I can get it a lot darker, like that. And then we're just seeing a bit of form and a bit of shape, and hopefully we're starting to see how lovely and gleamy these stones are going to look as we kind of go round. And this is going to be quite fun, because we've obviously had to focus on the sketching of the stone to get those to sort of get across how to get that effect. So now you've got all of this to let your imagination go wild. So everyone's going to do something slightly different, and maybe people are going to experiment with different colours, are going to experiment maybe putting some extra patterns and lines in and seeing where they take them. So when we get to share them next week, it should be really interesting to see what everyone's done and see where they've taken it. And I think just where I've got these little pearl shapes here, similar to the pearls we did last week, but on a smaller scale. I'm not going to make them as shiny as the stones. I don't want to detract from this sort of light effect that I've got here. But with just these, again, it would just be starting off with building up an outline of tone like that, and then softening it so it disappears towards the middle, and that just gives us a more subtle kind of pearly finish rather than the sort of gleamy stone finish. Eventually you're going to colour it all, but just with a bit more pressure around the edge. And if you want to get a bit more difference in, you can layer on a little bit of blue around the outline, just to again increase that slight bit of shadow. But we don't want to make them as shiny as the gemstones, and just sort of bring that round. So I think that's covered most of the kind of areas, all sort of like an idea for most of how they're going to fit together. I say we're just going to carry, I might just have a minute just to whiz round and get this black section in, because I think that will really start to set the stone, and it'd be nice to see that finish just before we go. So I'm going to be quite quick. Obviously I probably would spend a lot more time with my line work here, so if there's any small mistakes, forgive me, but I'm just going to bring that pattern, carrying it round here, and then just so I can complete that outline really, and we can get a feel of how it looks. And there we go, and I have magically managed to have the right number of stripes. I don't know how I did that, but if you do end up with two side by side, either just make one big one and pretend you meant it, or if you make one big one, then make the other ones around it slightly thicker, and then it sort of blends it in, it hides it a bit. But there we go, so that's got all my stripes in all the way around here, so it's quite a nice sort of peppermint stripe. And I would be putting a bit of shadow in on that side as well, where I've got the white stripes, but I'm going to change them into very pale green stripes, or greeny blue. And there we go, that just gives that bit of depth in there. And then, where's my dark blue pencil? Here it is. Would come in along this edge and add a bit more shading, just to get that impact working a bit more. So I hope that has given you an insight into how to get these different surface effects. We've really hopefully got this lovely gemstone feel in the middle, and then different effects of pieces going round. We've got all these lovely layers to play with, so think about all these shadows going to come in all the way around here, and how we're going to get those layers to really pop out. And I will very much look forward to seeing what you've done next week.